Mabel Adib was used to being invisible. Growing up as the youngest in a family of 7 in Succor, she rarely received attention. Her family was kind but overburdened, her siblings all carving out paths for themselves, leaving Mabel as the quiet one in the background. When she finally moved to Lagos, working as a maid in a luxurious apartment was a dream come true, proof that she had made it to the city and could build a new life. But over time, the silence of the big city made her feel even lonelier. She watched people from a distance, observing lives that seemed so full. When she was hired to work for Gideon Onyu, her life took on a new dimension. Gideon was charming, attentive, and courteous, showing her a kindness that made her feel truly seen for the first time. In her mind, Gideon became her anchor. The faintest smile or kind word from him lit up her day, and she convinced herself that he was more than a boss. When she found herself alone in his apartment, she wandered the rooms, brushing her fingers against his belongings, feeling a strange intimacy, as if his possessions held traces of him that she could somehow claim for herself. One evening, Mabel found herself in the bedroom, admiring the subtle luxury of his personal space. Her gaze fell on a shirt thrown over the arm of a chair, and without thinking, she held it to her face, inhaling deeply. It was as if she could feel his presence through the scent, filling the emptiness within her. From that night on, her habit grew. She took small, seemingly insignificant things, a handkerchief here, a pair of socks there. Her little collection became a secret ritual, a reminder of her connection to Gideon. Each time Mabel added an item to her collection, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known before. She held on to memories of moments long gone, like her mother's soft humming as she folded clothes back home. Those memories mingled with her present reality, grounding her when the city's rush became overwhelming. She told herself that this obsession was temporary. She wasn't harming anyone. But the thrill of taking Gideon's things filled her with a forbidden satisfaction, as if each piece connected her more deeply to him. Mabel began crafting little stories in her mind, imagining herself by his side, as a confidant, a loyal companion. In her fantasies, they'd laugh together, share secrets, and he'd gaze at her with warmth and understanding. But her dreams were shaken by the arrival of Helen, Gideon's girlfriend. Helen was everything Mabel was not: confident, elegant, and perfectly at ease in Gideon's world. Whenever Helen visited, Mabel could barely look her in the eye, feeling a twinge of jealousy that made her more determined to cling to her secret treasures. Helen was an outsider in Mabel's mind, disrupting the world she'd created, where only she and Gideon existed. Helen was quick to notice the subtle shifts in her surroundings. She'd often find Gideon's socks misplaced, or a shirt missing, small things that she initially dismissed. But over time, she began to feel an unease creeping in, her instincts alerting her to something wrong. She observed how Mabel's demeanor changed whenever she was around Gideon, her eyes following him with an intensity that made Helen uncomfortable. One evening, Helen confronted Gideon after Mabel had left for the day. "Have you noticed anything strange about Mabel?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Gideon looked at her, puzzled. "Strange? What do you mean?" Helen hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I don't know, Gideon. I just feel like she's overly attentive to you." Gideon laughed, brushing it off. "She's just thorough. Maybe she's a bit shy around you, that's all. She's never done anything unusual." But Helen's instincts wouldn't let her rest. She decided to keep a closer eye on Mabel, determined to find out what lay beneath her quiet exterior. The next weekend, Helen waited for the right moment when Gideon went out. She slipped into Mabel's room, her heart racing as she searched through drawers and shelves. Finally, she noticed a small box pushed under the bed. Pulling it out, she opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, she found Gideon's missing belongings, a collection of shirts, ties, socks, and even a pair of used boxers, all neatly folded. Helen's face turned pale, and a mixture of horror and anger surged through her. She realized the depth of Mabel's obsession and knew she needed to confront her. Helen waited until Gideon returned. Her anger simmered as she presented the box to him, recounting her discovery with a tense voice. Gideon was stunned, unable to reconcile the Mabel he knew with the disturbed woman Helen described. "I can't believe this," he murmured, his mind reeling. "She's always been so quiet, so respectful." Helen's eyes flashed with anger. "You need to confront her, Gideon. This isn't normal behavior. She's gone too far." When Mabel returned that evening, Gideon called her into the living room. She felt a knot form in her stomach as she saw Helen beside him, her expression unreadable. "Mabel, I need to ask you something," Gideon began, his voice calm but tense. He held up the box, and Mabel's face drained of color. She felt her knees weaken, and she struggled to steady herself as the truth settled over her. "I don't understand why you'd do this," Gideon continued, his voice softening with pity. "If you needed something, you could have asked." "Why, Mabel? Why take these things?" Mabel looked down, unable to meet his eyes. Her hands shook as she spoke. "Sir, I didn't mean to harm anyone. I just admired you. I felt like having these things helped me feel close to you." Helen's face twisted with anger. "You think that justifies this? Gideon trusted you, and you betrayed that trust. This is more than admiration, Mabel. It's an obsession." Tears filled Mabel's eyes, and she choked back a sob. "I'm sorry. I know it's wrong. I just didn't know how to stop. I didn't mean for it to go this far." Gideon sighed, his expression pained. "Mabel, you've put us in a difficult position. I think it's best if you leave. You need to find a way to work through this." The next day, Mabel packed her belongings, her movements slow and mechanical. She felt like a ghost in the home she had once thought of as her sanctuary. Gideon handed her an envelope with money, his eyes filled with sadness and regret. "Take care of yourself, Mabel," he said softly. "I hope you find peace." She nodded, unable to speak as she walked out of the apartment, the weight of her shame pressing down on her. As she left, she glanced back one last time, feeling the loss of the world she had built in her mind, the dreams that had given her hope. She knew now that her obsession was a symptom of something deeper, a void she'd carried within her all her life. In the weeks that followed, Mabel settled into a small room in a quieter part of Lagos, far from Gideon's apartment. She took on a new job and kept to herself, focusing on finding a sense of purpose. She enrolled in a local support group, finding solace in the shared stories of others who struggled with loneliness and loss. Over time, she began to heal, learning to let go of her fixation on Gideon and embracing her own journey of self-discovery. Though memories of him still lingered, she found herself moving on, understanding that her happiness had to come from within. As for Gideon and Helen, life returned to normal, though the experience left a subtle mark on their relationship. They were more cautious, more aware of the hidden struggles others might carry. And whenever Gideon looked out at the city lights, he hoped that somewhere, Mabel was finding the peace and purpose she had so desperately sought.